This evening, I take great pleasure in welcoming the Argyll-based writer and academic, Dr. Rosemary Power. And tonight, Rosemary is going to talk to us about the Columcille. So I'll pass over to Rosemary and let her introduce her talk for this evening. Thank you.
Gyrmae gysfaltio roedd yn show yn leach ter yn lewa canonis. Gohara hei leis yn tashbantas, scales the museum, Columcille. So thanks very much for having me tonight to talk about the great relic of Columcille, which is the Book of Kells. And I will now try to share my PowerPoint on a share screen, and it might work this time. Has it worked?
It'll be up. There we go. Yes, it's up.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Yes. This is the chief relic of the Western world. It was called Columcille and the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells dates from about 800, so it was 2 centuries after the time of Columcille's death. And it seems to have been promoted or composed in order for his bicentenary, though as we'll see, it was never finished for various reasons. So I'd just like to say something about what it is. It's now in Trinity College, Dublin. Some people may well have seen it there. That's how it got there. What it is and how it's ordered on vellum, of course, which took a large number of young calves' skins. And then what it can tell us a bit about daily life, particularly from the animals who are depicted in it. Dogs, cats, mice, cock and hens, wolf, horses, and a lot of birds, especially the dove, which in Christian iconography is, of course, the Holy Spirit. But Columba's name is, of course, Latin for dove as well. So there are some happy combinations. And it's the kind of thing you find a great deal in this book, where there are several equal possible meanings, multivalency among the images. I am not an art historian by training, though I have written a book on this, which I'll mention at the end. And a colleague of mine, Don McGowan, has written an enormously valuable book for any enthusiasts. And I'll put the details in the chat. Goes into every detail, every minor bit. So what it is, it's a copy of the 4 Gospels. So it's a major gospel book of a kind which was very common in the early Christian era, necessary for reading in church, of course, but these very large, very beautiful, elaborate books were taken as relics, as precious in themselves. And when we see the work that's gone into the Book of Kells, we can well understand why. It's also one of the later ones. There are ones from about 700, 100 years earlier, but it takes the whole artistry and the theology of it to a completely new level. And there's nothing quite like it in that period. So that's a very brief background. I believe it was created on the island of Iona and later taken for safekeeping to Kells, a new monastery in inland Ireland. Now, I'm trying to move my slides on. And it's gone too far now. The chief relic of the Western world is a 19th century translation given to it because in the year 1007, when it was already over 200 years old, it was stolen. So the great gospel book of Columcille was wickedly stolen by night from the western sacristy in the great stone church of Cananas, that's Kells. It was the most precious object of the Western world on account of a human ornamentation. This gospel was recovered after 2 months and 20 nights, its gold having been taken off it and with a sod over it. So that is quite a long entrance in the annals of Ulster, which have a particular interest in Iona. it shows that it was taken, it was precious, it was kept in the great stone church of Canonis, which is presumably the stone church which is still there, with this tiny loft which can only be accessed by a ladder as a way of preserving such things. This record is the 11th of 12th for the year 1007, so it probably happened in December. So this was a winter theft, and we're lucky that it survived in fairly good condition, though there is one Irish manuscript which survived in part in a bog for 1200 years, which was unexpected. So it was taken and found again. The gold cover would have been itself a precious item of a craftswork on the outside and would have been seen most of the time. And it may then have been damaged because both the beginning and a large chunk of the end are missing. I said it wasn't the oldest. This is perhaps the oldest on these islands. It is got the romantic librarian name of Durham A210. There's only 4 sheets of it surviving because it was used for medieval dust cover for a very boring work. But it shows something of the artistry. This is the end of Mark's Gospel, and they had a spare column. This was a 2-column work, Book of Kells, a single column. So they put the Paternoster of the Lord's Prayer into each of those 3 columns in different languages, and then surrounded them by this interlace. At first sight, it just looks quite harmonious, but looking at it carefully, you notice that the interlace pattern for each of those D forms is different, and each of them is done very well. And the little interstices at the corner, they've got the same pattern, but the palette, the colours, are used in a different order. So while very simple in colours and such like, it shows a remarkable adaptability and interest, and I think a fair amount of pleasure in creativity. Anyway, back to the Book of Kells, or another book just as good. In the about 1180, that Welshman on the make, we know as Giraldus Cambrensis, working for the Anglo-Normans in Ireland, got the opportunity to see a great gospel book at Kildare, which is an inland site dedicated to St. Bridget, and perhaps one of the oldest sites. And this is what he wrote, in Latin, of course. He was no friend of the Irish. He was usually pretty derogatory, but just for once he was astonished. Among all the miracles of Kildare, nothing seems to me more miraculous than that wonderful book, which they say was written at the dictation of an angel during the lifetime of the Virgin. That's Bridget. This book contains the concordance of the 4 Gospels, according to St. Jerome, with almost as many drawings as pages, and all of them in marvellous colours. Here you can look upon the face of divine majesty, drawn in a miraculous way. Here too the mystical representations of the evangelists, now having 6, now 4, now 2 wings. Here you will see the eagle, there the calf. Here the face of a man, there that of a lion. And there are almost innumerable drawings. If you look at them carelessly and casually and not too closely, you may judge them to be mere daubs rather than careful compositions. You will see nothing subtle, but everything is subtle. But if you take the trouble to look closely and penetrate with your eyes to the secrets of the artistry, you will notice such intricacies, so delicate and subtle, so close together and well knitted, so involved and bound together, and so fresh still in their colourings, that you will not hesitate to declare that these things must have been the work not of men, but of angels. And 800 years later, I'll add an addendum, which is that Kildare was a female foundation, so it could have been the work not of men or of angels, but of women. Yeah. But we haven't found this book, it's unlikely that the Book of Kells was there. There's some things, just to show you, going back over the concordance is, these of you Sabine canons, you find all in the European artistry of the time. It was a way of finding concordance between the 4 Gospels. Here they're highly embellished, and in the arch above, which is very much a classical arch, are the four symbols of evangelists: Matthew, a man; Mark, a lion; Luke, a calf or ox; and John, an eagle. And in the order which these Gospels are used today, which wasn't always set at the time. If you can see very closely, it is actually quite a lot of fun here. In that arch, you have the lion is actually licking the face of the man on one side, while on the other side, the ox and the eagle are kissing, and the ox is swishing its tail over the eagle. So another thing you have is a lot of fun and humour. There are also tiny figures in those columns, which I hope to come back to. In earlier times, like the 19th and 20th century, commentators were embarrassed, as they saw it, of the figures. They loved the innate, intricate work. They enjoyed that, but they found these ridiculous. However, they should be compared to Eastern icons, which again used highly formalized understanding of the human body. And in those terms, there can be a great deal of interesting material gathered, including a lot about the clothing of the time. And there are the four evangelists again in their order. The carelessly and casually, 7 lines up from the bottom, you will see a rather gorgeous yellow dog walking along the line, 6 lines from the bottom. There's a dog. If he was, or she, turned around the other way, that would just be a dog, an extra decoration. But this way, as I love telling children, it's a punctuation point. The particular technique called head under the wing, where if you had a spare bit of space on the line, you wrote up before you went down, and you had something like to tell you so. And in the Book of Kells, it's always some delightful animal. And again, the subtle and close together details. This is from the opening of Matthew's Gospel, and even little things like the holding of the Gospel book in this pyramidal form of under a hand underneath it, with the pyramidal folds of the garments, is actually found again and seems to be very much a reference to Trinity, as are the 3 dots on the clothing. So that's the kind of small detail which emerges and has been doing since about 1990, when a major conference in Dublin helped to bring together scholars who started unlocking it again in this degree of detail. And this is the portrait of John the Evangelist, which I hope to come back to, because partly for what it contains and also for misfortune it occurred, having been taken from my owner in Viking period for safety to Kells, and then in the Reformation period from Kells to Dublin Castle, and then to Trinity College Library for safekeeping. It was not only written over, because people wrote on books in their time, even ones like this. Some of them are hilarious. As one librarian wrote, there's a page missing here, and 80 years later, somebody else wrote, found it. And so you have this kind of details, but it also went for rebinding and cropping in the mid-19th century disastrously, because this one, they have actually chopped off the outer figure. It's John the Evangelist in the middle, seated holding up a book with this very elaborate halo. But outside the boundaries, you may see a hand on one side and feet at the bottom, and at the top, the beginning of a head, which is presumably the figure of Christ upholding John in the sort of formal crucifixion posture, of closed posture. But the binder at the time got out his guillotine and chopped off various things, including the head of Christ. So it's damaged as well. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert thought they were signing it at one stage, but somebody gave them a barely, plain leaf, so they didn't damage it. Now, I seem to have lost an image. Well, here's one anyway. These are the concordance closer up. You may be able to see the playfulness in the upper levels. and even the tiny figures in the arches who are apparently pulling their beards. You get a lot of this in the Book of Kells, usually two people together with their legs intertwined, bearding, but they don't seem to be aggressive. And this seems to be part of the monastic round, in my view, which is the use of the Psalms. The entire Psalter was said every day in Latin, in larger than 3 groups of 50 Psalms. And the kind of opening, as recorded in the rule of St. Benedict in the 4th century and used widely, was a line from Psalm 50, which is, Lord, open my lips and my mouth shall declare your praise. And here they're doing it for each other, or here separately, all except one little beardless boy at the bottom. This is the evangelist from Luke. What happened was, with the planning of the Book of Kells, that each gospel started with the 4 evangelists together. They were very strong on unity between them and often cross-referred. Followed by a portrait, as we've just seen, of a single evangelist, of which only 2 survive. Only 3 of these evangelist symbols survive too. And then a full page of the first handful of words of the gospel in question. So you get a highly elaborate opening with lots of pages, which presumably were displayed on major occasions. Even more astonishingly, Donoghue McGowan has claimed, but argued very, very forcefully and well, that the main work was done by 2 people, which, given the immense nature of the book, it would have been between 350 and 400 pages. A lot of the end is missing. Shows a complete commitment for life. And the actual colouring, the palette, the whole way of, well, first of all, killing the calves and making the vellum, and then creating the colourings from like local or else imported colourants, and things like egg white, which we use as fixative, and fruit gums and so on. Would have been a massive work by the entire monastic community, which may be why it stopped and then restarted, as he claims. A scribe called Connachtach seems to have died in, according to the annals, in 802. There was a Viking attack in 795 on Iona. After Connachtach's death in 802, the entire building was burnt. A lot was stolen. In 806, 68 of the community were slaughtered. This is completely beside those who were enslaved and so on. And then in 825, there was another attack. So the degree of disruption in actually getting the materials together to produce a book would have been major, as well as the artistry. Anyway, so you would have started with the 4 evangelists, and then you'd have someone like Matthew, or in that case Luke, but he's vanished. And this is the opening of Luke's Gospel, which looks marvelous and almost Islamic. And the design may be actually based on the floor plan of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is the place which includes the place of crucifixion and the tomb, which you can still see, called the Edicule, the little house. Somebody actually had been there and came to Iona in the later 8th century, a Frankish bishop who showed them the floor plan. So that might be part of it. But this letter is in fact Q. It's a huge quonium, inasmuch first word of Luke's Gospel, which you may, I don't know if you can see my pointer, it may be easier to start with the M at the end and then get the I and the U, which is upside down, and the N. And then you get round to the Q, which has this massive long tail up the side. And then the U and the O are sort of stylized within it. So you have to know where to start to read that. Within it, there are also 27 figures. some of whom are behaving as if they are completely drunk, in complete contrast to this highly stylized and decorative and very formal and complete letter. That's part of history which is not completely understood, though I have views on it, which we may get in questions. That's Matthew. I put him here because he comes at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel. Matthew's Gospel, what we now call chapter 1, is basically the genealogy of Jesus, and then it restarts with Christ was born in Bethlehem of Judea. And there's a whole second opening, which is equally elaborate. But here is Matthew in these rather soft pinks and purples. They're faded, but not, see that, gentle. There he is looking, holding his book with the calf of Luke on one side and the eagle of John on the other, and two little lions' head on his chair, which are Mark. And he's looking. It may be part of a convention, as in Eastern icons, but only the figure of Christ looks directly at the viewer. Because here, one of his eyes was never finished. It hasn't got an iris. That's the one looking towards it. It's the one on the right. It would have been his left eye. He's got a tiny iris on the right. He's also, just to bring attention to his feet are very neatly, of course, bare for reference, are gently against those roundels at the bottom. All very complete, very gentle. Now, a few pages later, with the second oak, that's him. That's him a bit closer. Yes, you can see the lion now, and his missing iris, his eye. So that is it. A few, which is the Christ figure at the restart. Again, in many ways, it's the same style, within this arch, this universal arch, with the roundels at the side, with the panels at the side. In this case, you've got the 4 winged figures, which may again be the evangelist. I think I have to go back one. Over the head, instead of a halo, over this is the Christ figure, he's got a full beard here. Jesus actually grows a beard in the course of the Book of Kells. Starts with a little beard line when he's a baby, and it moves onwards. And this red gold hair, which was the standard in Europe for figures of Christ. But instead of a halo, has various other symbols. There is, of course, a cross linking up to this little black box, which presumably is the reliquary, which was the bones of some saint for the dedication of an altar. On each side, he has a peacock. Peacocks being the reference in art, European art, Western European art, to the resurrection of Jesus. Partly the beauty and the wonderful display male peacock can make, and also because it was believed that their flesh was so hard in the tomb. Anyway, there they are in this glorious blue, which is woad. Neither is the same. They're each painted slightly differently. You get a sort of harmony, but never the repetition. They have chalices, cups, pouring out grapes, which are Last Supper references. Are other little white panels on their breasts, which are Eucharistic wafers with the red cross on them. So these are resurrection, passion, death, resurrection figures instead of a halo around the head of Jesus. And then, unlike Matthew, he's actually seated in this rather small chair, which always reminds me a bit of one of those not terribly comfortable office chairs with a bit of padding at the back. But you notice, even so, the knee is moving upwards, and the 2 feet, the left foot is neatly against the roundel, as in the pattern of Jesus, or pattern of Matthew, but the other foot is overstepped into the roundel, the one with the knee moving. So at first this looks as if it's an artistic error, but presumably it is also the context. It is the image of Christ walking towards the women witnesses at the tomb on the first day of the resurrection. So he's moving forward to onlooker. So that tiny detail of 2 toes overlooking has a sort of theological understanding behind it. And there you see him a bit closer with the knee and the toes. And the grapes. I think one is meant to be olives, but the grapes are quite distinct on the left. And this is followed by this, which is a Coptic cross, two-arm cross as found in the Holy Sepulchre. The only cross in the Book of Kells, incredibly detailed, with birds and such like entwined with snakes, going down to minute little circles, which may have been done by silver stamps. And here again. In fact, quite a lot of them, the panels also look like silverwork, metalwork, and maybe they use silver little stamps to do it. But the deliberate painting on some pages is made you look as if it's three-dimensional. It's a Columcille effect to try and look like metalwork and a shrine box of some kind. And also, if you go to it, in places, because it has 3 or 4 levels of colour and wash and gleaming, as a gleam and so on, it actually raises off the page. And that is John again. You can perhaps see more clearly that the hatchet job there, and that is John more closely. And that enormous thing in his hand is actually a pen, a quill, presumably a goose quill, and at the bottom is a tiny ink pot. So he's also in the process of writing gospel. This one I just passed by because of time. This is the so-called Temptations, the opening of Lent, with a figure of Christ coming up behind what would be very much like the little shrine chapel of Columcille on Iona, but painted and with many references to Old and New Testaments. And the little black figure on the side, which one child told me was a dead angel, which I think is a wonderful expression of what it is. Very interestingly, cannot actually touch the figure of Christ, is holding out the hand for the scroll of the Testament. And that is how it finished. That is how it appears as a genealogy. Well, Luke comes just before the Lent Temptations passage. And that's the next page, just to show that's a huge, elaborate opening to Lent. But as tonight is actually Maundy Thursday, the first of the 3 days of Passion Story, I thought I would show you something of how it's adapted in this Book of Kells and how very subtle it is. Which uses Matthew's Gospel primarily, partly because Matthew's was the Jewish Gospel, very much refers to what Jewish people were doing. And then it moves on at the resurrection period to Luke, because Luke was a Gentile, a non-Jew, a Greek. And that's a very clear one, though there is one surprise in the middle. This is a text page, though it's also the opening of a major reading for Maundy Thursday. Again, you have this arch of the world, but at the top you have 2 great beasts clashing, teeth roaring. Although it's in a different gospel, there is the reference to Psalm 22, which starts, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And Mark's gospel, that's Jesus on the cross. But it goes on to say, I'm being torn apart like great beasts of passion, roaring and howling. And here you have already roaring and howling at the top. In the arch themselves, you have 2 very dark coloured snakes. Snakes usually seem to refer to the human being, quite modest snakes, but these look like the snakes of Eden, crossed towards the head. And the figure of Christ, huge in comparison to this arch of the world, in a saltire position, coming out, out of the arch, 2 feet below it, out towards the onlooker. This is traditionally called the arrest, but it actually appears to be 3 things happening at once. First of all, there's actually part of the text is here in that arch, hymno dicto exuerant monte olivum, and the hymn being sung, psalm being sung, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So it's directly placed, it's opposite the page, which is the story of the Last Supper, and the rest of the text continues on the other side of this leaf. So the Christ figure is being either arrested, held, by two figures who are not really dressed for being soldiers. They're much more dressed for being priests, but they are in profile, which in Eastern iconography again breaks the harmony. Out of their heads are growing pots of olives, which does suggest they are priests, because an obscure text in, I think, one of the minor prophets, Habakkuk, has priests having pots of olives growing out of their heads. So here it seems to be happening, and Mount of Olives is where Jesus went, the mount after the Last Supper. So if they are priests, why are they arresting him would be the next question. And of course, here the Christ figure is looking directly at the onlooker, and it's that largeness. On the other page, as said, was the Last Supper, the institution of Eucharist. And at that, according to Adafnan, 100 years before this, who is the biographer of Columba, at that period, in the Eucharist, two priests would between them break the bread and then pass it around to those receiving. So this may also be taken as two priests breaking the bread, which is Jesus, the bread of life, according to John's Gospel. So again, you've got the multiple references. But of course, because they are, in profile, they may also be other parts of that story, of not the rest, the soldiers, but also the false witnesses before Caiaphas, and indeed thieves on the cross. Their colours, they have bare feet, reference again. Jesus himself has the traditional colouring of red and blue. They're rather more obscure. I thought I had another one. Anyway, that goes on, and you get the story of Jesus' arrest and taking and crucifixion. This is the text page for the crucifixion in Matthew. Tunc crucificerant Christe et cum eos duas ladrones. Then they crucified Christ, and with him two thieves. And again, you get the saltire approach, which you get of that lifting of Jesus. The first letter, tunc, that T, is a great beast with huge teeth, one of these great beasts of Bashan from Psalm 22, completely contorted. He has claws and paws up here, or claws down here, and a tangled tail. Definitely roaring here, and within the mouth, these small snakes, which are us humans. And at the top, a cat, a green cat, apparently spitting blood. It's so trashed. Cats come in a lot, and presumably not only lived a lot in the monastic circumstances, but were sometimes used as references for monks. Anyway, this one is definitely trapped. There is no doubt about it. On the other side, that psalm says, great beasts of Bashan, rending and tearing, like a lion roaring. And here you have the lion, presumably not driven from life, but not bad. And this is the roar coming out of the lion's mouth. This is lovely when you do this with children, saying, how do you draw a roar? This is an example. A ferocious roar coming out. So it is very blank. There is red patterning at the background, but otherwise a lot of it's bare vellum within. Oh, I've lost it. A curious feature here is, of course, that the border is broken, or has to go around three sets of people who are looking away. This is a verso, recto, a right-hand side page, and on the other side, they're looking towards the verso page on the other side, which is, however, blank. Presumably, there was going to be an image there, an illumination, which is not text for a major opening like this, but it was never completed. And in fact, it may have been deliberately left blank as a kind of memorial to those young fellows who got killed in 806 or got enslaved and were never seen again. This is from another manuscript in Durham, A217, which gives an idea of the kind of style they would have had, of a Jesus on the cross, which is very much arms open, fully clothed, a very calm, heroic pose, with two angels above and two traditional figures below. But with a book like the Book of Kells, you imagine something most extraordinary coming out of it. But it was left blank, apart from a tiny scribble from somebody in the 17th century. So this one I will put in briefly because it's very unusual in that it is the crucifixion in Mark's Gospel. At the time, although Mark's Gospel is now considered the oldest of the four, at the time it was seen as a rather weak version of Matthew. So it was very little used, and yet it gets a full page here also for the story of a crucifixion, so you couldn't have used them both at the same time. And this one says, erat tertia ora. You just have to believe me, because that entirely tangled pattern of this jagged writing, which you find elsewhere in times of high drama and pain, says that. And then there's a little bit of red down here I'll come back to. Erat, it is Mark's Gospel, so you have a rather astonished lion with the snakes, harmless lion, but looking completely astonished. At this other end, you may not see, is a very large snake. This may be a reference to Psalm 90, where you would tread on the lion and the dragon. You will be safe under all circumstances. The lion, the dragon, and the basilisk, the king of snakes. And this may be the king of snakes. So there are unusual features here. No boundary all round. The border is just two pillars on the sides. These may, I suggest, I've worked on this page most, may be considered to be the gold-covered pillars of the Temple of Solomon, which was rebuilding for most of the time of Jesus. These gold pillars of a temple. An angel has alighted, again, that comes only in Mark, with the book rather than a scroll, which is the New Testament. And very oddly at the top, there's this head looking over and looking towards the bottom of the page over on the other side, which is the story of a crucifixion. This is a third hour. Jesus is on the cross. This is moving up to it. Right at the bottom, you'll see feet, a robe on the other side, feet, and the end of a robe. Death, it says in Mark's Gospel, the veil of a temple was rent asunder. And this is actually Jesus broken, as we've seen in the other Gospels, actually reuniting at death as the veil of a temple is rent asunder. And we get to see something, which in this case is the written word. That's quite a complex argument, but I hope it will be reasonably clear. Those are the two pages. The texts continue on this page. Then you get the major opening, perhaps at the third hour, 9 o'clock, for a whole day's of prayer. This at the bottom, this little red one, it seems to be a little litany, which is not scriptural, but seems to have been added in. They crucified him, crucified the one whom they divided. Those of Jesus have to be divided. And here, of course, the divided Christ is being reunited. It's complex because whoever did that head of Jesus, if it is Jesus at the top, was used completely different style. And in fact, the size is completely unlike anything else. I argue with Don McCowan on this one. He thinks it is genuine, original. May have been added in Kells just because the head and neck are painted first. And of course, they had to leave to dry. And no, the original artist never got back to the head, which I presume would have looked like the head of the angel. On this page, which is the story of a crucifixion, you get the usual large pauses and openings, which are what nowadays would be chapter and verse. But you also, on the word Golgotha, you get a wee bird. And the wee bird is very obviously looking towards this major opening and walking along the word Golgotha. So walking inwards on the text, but looking over its shoulder. I'd be very glad of any suggestions, and you can look at all this online from TCD in their digital collection, greater detail, what bird it is. Certain aspects suggest a dove, and it may be Columba looking on, or for example, or the Holy Spirit looking on. It doesn't seem to be a peacock because it doesn't have that long tail feather, though it has some of the glorious plumage. The claws are much more like an eagle's. So perhaps it's a composite bird, but is there and present on this page. So that is Mark, very unusual, practically unheard of in Western art. I think there's a couple of Coptic texts the same. That's the wee bird, for those who would like, with those large claws. Then it moves to Luke's Gospel, the Gentile Gospel, for the first day of the week, the resurrection account. And here you get these pink, blue colours. You get the monster, the great beast of Bashan, that has now become a kind of pantomime beast, with something hitting its nose and its teeth entangled in interlace and roaring off the page. This is a recto, right-hand page. Una, the first word, which is on the first day of a week, first, unique, the only one. And out of the U come two peacocks. They're rising upwards out of that slight entanglement. Interlace, moving very much upwards. So this is a resurrection moment is being recorded here. And of course, the playfulness there is, as John uses, Jesus Christ as the word. Here the word is rising out of the word, literally out of the word una. Surrounded by four angels who look completely blitz. They're sitting on the letters in three occasions, looking away, maybe also representing the guards that are in Matthew's Gospel, but certainly holding their staffs of office, which are often quite elaborate, as here. They were originally, by the way, liturgical fly swatters. And in fact, St. Columba's fly swatter became a relic and was kept for centuries and then lost in a storm. But they became a staff of office as well. Una, on the second line, you have this M has become Coptic cross, as found in Jerusalem. You have the snakes becoming birds, that is, human beings becoming heavenly in the margins, pushing off our beastie here. But also, right at the top, you have the last line of death of Jesus, the putting of the tomb, the women having witnessed it all, they went away and observed Sabbath, as is commanded, except the word commanded, mandatum, is actually not at the top, it's actually within the image, it's in the borders. So presumably the theology of this is that the resurrection was also being mandated, and that was why it's within. It's not a lack of space. There's various ways they could have got around it. So that again is some of the details which can be easily missed or refound. Personally, I love the angels, and rather sad that so much of the black ink from the other side has come through. There's one of the angels sitting with his fly swatter, or her fly swatter, and plumaged wings. There's the beast roaring off the page, fairly harmless by now. And there's one holding out. Oh, that's my plug for my own book. So what can I say otherwise? That is the creating, that's the pattern of it. I think as it's 7:45, perhaps it's best that Julia, that I just stop now and Jacqueline, Julia, whoever's working, and see if there are any questions. I'll try to answer them.
Thank you, Rosemary. That was really interesting. It's really lovely to see it in depth like that as well. First of all, we do have a question from Maureen. Maureen, do you want to ask it yourself at all? Or shall I ask it for you? You there, Maureen? Okay, Maureen's asked if there will be any reference about Donad, the hill fort at Donad at all?
Not in the Book of Kells, because its purpose is different. It's one of what we call a luxury gospel book. It would have been a chief relic which people came to see at Iona. Dunad is, of course, mentioned in Adofnan 100 years earlier. But I think that is the earliest reference is in Adofnan's Life of Columba, but unless there's someone who can correct me.
No, that's what when we've been doing it in education in the museum, we do talk about the mention there that you've just said. Yes, that's correct.
Yes, that's as I just remind that people can see these completely free in TCD digital legends. You can get to the Book of Kells and you can examine every page to a certain degree in high resolution.
And Archie Henderson's got a question as well. Archie, do you want to ask it yourself?
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me. You okay?
Yep.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you. That was an excellent talk. Thank you, Rosemary. It was just, I'm interested actually in early medieval sculpture. And so with regards to the Book of Kells, I was interested if you would have any thoughts as to whether or not the sort of preferred colour palette that was used in the Book of Kells might have been reflected in other early medieval sculpture on monuments, like sort of like freestanding high crosses and the like. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, I think it would be wonderful if it was true. If we could, it's certainly one possibility, and would certainly make a lot of sense of the Iona high crosses, where certainly some of the imagery is directly reflected in the Book of Kells. That's particularly the Virgin and Child imagery. The palette of the Book of Kells is enormous. I mean, none of the others are like this, but if they can create them for this, they don't use any gold. They use this yellow orpiment, which is apparently it's arsenic, so don't use too much in one go, but your sculptures will be outside. The woad, which makes the blues, was used in all kinds of mixes, as were the reds and pinks. A lot of some of those colours could be got from seashells. So why not? In particular, if some of the crosses, particularly on Iona, are embossed, that would pick out the embossing as you have here. What's your opinion?
Archie, what do you think?
I mean, I think these things were made to be seen when it comes to things like high crosses and other sculpture from the period. If they're standing out in the landscape, I would imagine they'd be made to be seen, and why not? I was just curious as to whether or not the colours would be available for sort of painting on vellum would be the same, or types of colours that they could then use for painting on sandstone and the like.
I don't have the technical knowledge to respond directly because I don't know what the absorption level would be. But if you can make these locally, I mean, woad was colour which the early Irish laws say could only be worn in clothing of a kingly caste. Nobody else was allowed to wear it. It was highly expensive. The early Irish divorce laws, and boy, the Irish didn't half like divorce in law. It depended how much the woad was growing, how much the husband got and how much the wife. The more it was processable, the wife got, or the value of it. So, you could do it, and especially if you did it over time, possibly. The ones that are made out of seashells, for example, possibly over several years. The greens eat the manuscripts. This is very acidic, but perhaps they work on stone. I think, we don't actually have any image of anything which is in colour, do we? So it's guessing.
Again,
exciting guessing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I can't help it.
Thank you very much. I've also got a question from Mike. Mike, do you want to ask your question about an Irish archaeologist that spoke to you?
Hear me?
Is that Mike?
Hello, this is Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
The question is, an archaeologist many years ago now told me that the artistic style in the Book of Kells was influenced by Coptic art. And that was a view amongst Irish archaeologists at the time. I wonder if that's still the view or if the view has been superseded since.
I don't think it has been superseded. In fact, it may have been reinforced by the finding of the bog salter in McFadden Salter about 20 years ago. I think Françoise Henri was the person who pretty well on her own researched the Book of Kells in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And she was of this opinion, some of the artistic style has got its equivalent in Coptic art. There are also some manuscripts which are similar to Syriac art. So that's highly specialized stuff. I can hardly, get in highly specialist journals. It was added to with the finding of the bog salter in Fadden, not far from Burr in County Offaly, where we did have a gospel book we know of. It's actually in the Bodleian now, and it won't go back to Ireland because it's got the Old English Mercian translation on it, so it's become acclimatized. But the salter, certainly the leather, the conservative told me personally, the leather was from some poor cow who was suffering so much from that dreadful condition where the eggs are laid under the skin and the young eat their way out. The poor animal would have been killed in a cow country like Ireland. And there is a suggestion of an imprint of papyrus on the inside of that leather cover. So, which again is a physical item which came presumably from Egypt somewhere, which again, suggests that there may well have been Coptic connections later, continuing and can be seen in artifacts. But certainly there's similarities in some of the Virgin and Child imagery, particularly, and also the Christogram, the XRI, which looks like a P in our alphabet, have got their equivalents. But they had a different palette, and Eastern iconography used very much an earth-based palette. So you get not only a brown Jesus, you get brown angels and so on.
Okay, Dave, thank you. That's very interesting. You mentioned a bog salter, which I've never heard of, and I think you mentioned a place name. Could you just go through that again? The place name?
It was found in a bog called Fadden Moor, which is near Burr, Birr, in County Offaly, which was the site of an early Christian monastery, we know, and from where what called the MacGregor Gospels, which are now in the Bodleian Library, were compiled.
Okay, could you please spell? I'd like to look this up. So could you please spell Fadden Moor? Is it as F or a PH?
F. No, this is in modern Anglicized Irish. Fadden More.
More. Okay, so no accent.
That's a salter, and it's near Burr in County Offaly.
I'm sure I'll be able to find it. Thank you very much, Rosemary. It's very interesting to hear about some Coptic influence.
Thank you very much for that question. And you've got lots of thank yous as well, Rosemary, for your wonderful talk. So thank you very much. If there are no more questions, what I'll do is I know that Rosemary is going to show you her book that she has if you want to read out a little, if you want to do some more research. So I don't know if you want to show that. Before you do that, just quickly, the NIT will be in 3 weeks' time, and it's Matt Ritchie from Archaeology Scotland. So if you're interested in joining us for that, then if you go online, you can join us that way. But thank you very much, Rosemary. That was an amazing talk. So well done to all that information, and so well displayed as well. So thank you from all of us.
Thank you for listening. Good, I could teach you. I could.